everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Unbridled Equestrian Podcast. Today, we have Sarah Griffiths joining us. Now, Sarah is the founder of the Animal Synergist, and she is a classical homeopathic practitioner offering homeopathic options and specialized nutritional consultations for horses and humans. I'm very excited to chat with you today, Sarah. Now, you are also in the middle of a study surrounding the equine microbiome. So, surrounding gut health, specifically as it pertains to things like colic, ulcers, and metabolic syndrome in horses. So, all things that are major concerns for the health and well being of our horses. And I can't wait to hear what you guys are finding with that, because I'm sure, much like in humans, the gut brain is having a huge impact on our equine friends,
Yes.
just like it is on humans. And I can't wait to hear what you guys are uncovering in this groundbreaking study. So thank you so much for joining us, Sarah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Perfect timing.
Yes. Now, you have also just launched a course this week, and I would love if you could share a little bit about that with our listeners too.
Yeah. I've been working on this one for a while. I've been focused on some equine forage focused programs for horse owners and for professionals as well to help people just get a bit of a lay of the land so they're not afraid to start eliminating some of those processed feeds and isolate vitamins, minerals, stuff like that. Ration balancers, things that are not necessarily that appropriate in terms of what horses actually eat in real life. So, and it can be kind of scary. And I found this with my pet parent clients as well, that switching from a whole food diet that's based on rotation of actual food versus, the quote unquote balanced and complete model where you feed out of a bag and you feed the same thing every day and it's just kind of easy, but it's not actually really that balanced and complete.
Mm.
There's really no such thing as a magic pill or there's nothing that substitutes for healthy like whole food nutrition that is actually recognized as food by that species. So for example, a bird of prey is not going to recognize grass as food because it's
Right.
instinctual to their DNA. They can't survive on that based on their anatomy physiology. So horses, however, are plant eaters. So I really wanted to focus on the evolutionary reasons why horses exist, why they're so large, why they have hindgut fermentation
Mm.
versus ruminants that have a totally different system are still herbivores. But why do we have these two different types of herbivores? Like, what is the point of
Mm.
that? Points of that hindgut fermentation system is the evolutionary pathway that the equid species took to get there was to diversify their fiber. And so in the ancestral diet of horses, we have up to 50 different species of plants in their diet, 14 species of grasses, and 20% of their diet is actually herbs in nature. And they eat seasonally as well. So they have this seasonal rotation that goes with the different times of the year, the different plants that are growing throughout that time of the year, and how they
Mm.
integrate their systems with the outside world. We've just completely axed that. And we've axed that for every domestic species, including ourselves. So that's sort of where I'm going. And I've been on this path for the last 20 years as a practitioner. And what I see in my practice is a lot of for horses, it's gut dysfunction. For dogs and cats, it's gut dysfunction. A lot of people have gut dysfunction, IBS and the like. There's probiotics out there. Which ones do you use? What do you do with all this information? Prebiotics and all these supplements and everything. So, and
Yes.
it's become with the internet so overwhelming to understand like what it is that we're supposed to be doing. And so the horses really are such good teachers for that because they're having such a struggle with these specific areas of their system. And
Mhm.
because their gut in relation to the rest of their body, the percentage size wise is so enormous that when we see this much dysfunction in this many horses, which is between 70 and 90% of horses have ulcers or have colic. So, in my mind, if I'm seeing that in my practice with any sort of pathology, there's a big red flag going, and like, what can I do to assist this entire situation rather than just my one client? And that's why I started doing some courses, because accessing a practitioner is always, there's financial constraints on that. It's very time consuming because I'm doing a much deeper dive than a doctor would necessarily do.
Sure.
And so that time that it takes to do that is just, it's prohibitive for a lot of people. And so I really wanted to be able to give people a foundation so that even before they decide to work with me later, they're already doing this foundational stuff. I don't have to do that with them in their consultation. And then
Mm.
if they're already starting down that road, then I can help them to keep going rather than me having to teach every single one of my clients these very things that are basic to me, but they're not basic. I've just been doing this for so long that it is second nature for me. And not to say that I have all the answers, because I really don't. I'm still learning too. And my horse is probably my biggest teacher, as probably everybody who listens to you would say about their horse. So that's why I'm involved also in this scientific study, because I was hitting some walls going, okay, so we actually don't have this information on certain fronts. We need more information to make better decisions for our horses. So that's where I'm at. But I've been experimenting with my horses, my clients' horses for a very long period of time. So I have some protocols now. I'm starting to see what works and what doesn't work, trying to figure out how to help these animals. I mean, there's so much going on the equine management and husbandry front. It's overwhelming. So this is one piece that you can, really dive into. And because it's something that we can control no matter what environment they're in currently, and we've got a lot of people talking about better training, better relationships, systems, enrichment, treating them like sentient beings, which is what they are. Those pieces are really important. But if their gut is totally trashed, how they're going to assimilate all of that new information, it can be stressful. So combining all of these things is extremely important. And I talk a lot about supplements and how insane the supplement industry is now, and how overwhelming and far reaching it's become an industry, right? It's not just healthy eating anymore. It's biohacking and all of these.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
Okay.
huge money in the supplement
Let's
industry.
just go back to for us, we live very stressful lives a lot of the time too, which is a big problem. So we do really need to kind of get a grip on a few things and make things a little bit more simple, because everyone's so overwhelmed and it's hard to make decisions when you're overwhelmed.
Yeah, so many great points there. And it's true. We're living extremely stressful lives. Our horses are living often in very stressful circumstances. And their gut health is contributing to a lot of different challenges that we're all experiencing. The hard thing is we're all in this together, right? Because if we're struggling and our horse is struggling, it just kind of snowballs. I think there's almost nothing more stressful than, if your kids are struggling or if your horse is struggling, because the outcome of that challenge is often so extreme and the stakes are so high. There's a few things that I would love to dig into. So, one thing I don't think I even touched on in your intro is the farm project, Rewild Farm Canada. So, I want to talk about that because when you mentioned that initially horses were supposed to have all these herbs as part of their diet, or did have all of these herbs as part of their diet, it made me think of the farm project that you're involved in. But can we also first talk a bit about this trial that is now being done? Because I think that is so fascinating and so applicable for just about everybody in the horse world right now, given that 70 to 90% of our horses actually are struggling with these gut health issues, ulcers, colic, things like that. So can we dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
In the midst of my creating and trying to build protocols and working with clients and stuff, I really was coming up short. I had a lab that I would send the information to my clients to do microbiome testing on their horses who had a lot of gut dysfunction going on. But that was in the UK and it was very expensive and very hard to ship there. And, sometimes it wouldn't get there on time and then the samples would be lost and then we have to do it again. And it was just so frustrating. And there was nobody in North America doing that. So finally, there's a lab that does it for dogs and cats. They're in the US, in California. And recently they had to put out a test kit for horses. And I was like, okay, so if they have a test kit, then they have to have the healthy ranges for what is a healthy gut versus your horse's gut. And so I messaged them and I said, how did you get that information? Because what does that even mean? Like, do we even know what a healthy horse microbiome looks like? Like, I don't think that that's could be even slightly accurate in my mind based on what we're seeing in clinically. So I got actually a response from the microbiologist who owns the company. She's a PhD microbiologist. And they told me that they based it on a trial that they did on 200 horses. And the criteria was that they were asymptomatic. So they didn't have necessarily very good diets. They didn't necessarily have very good places to live. Many of them were in like 5-day-a-week training programs, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing that they knew that they could say they were healthy was that they didn't have symptoms and they weren't actually physically ill. So I was like, okay, well, would you be interested in running a trial on horses that do have symptoms and do have diagnosed ulcers, have recurrently colic, are suspected of ulcers, have fecal water syndrome issues, and possibly metabolic issues? Because these are all the things that I'm seeing in clinic, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. So they got back to me like within less than 24 hours and they said, yes, 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 we want to do this. And I said, I will do the sampling. I know enough horses in my area that I can just go out and do all of that. So I went around for probably the last 6 to 8 months sampling horses. It's been quite eye-opening, amazing. I've gone to go to a whole bunch of barns, meet a whole bunch of people, talk to them about all the various challenges that they're seeing with their horses and all different kinds of environments, different disciplines, etc. So we have sampled almost 200 horses and we're finished the sampling phase of the trial, which is really relieving and awesome. So the last samples went down just before I moved to the islands, probably about a month ago. The last of the samples arrived at the lab, and I believe this week they're finalizing the analysis of all of those tests. So then the analysis phase can begin. And we have a working online document to brainstorm about what we want to analyze out of this data and how we want to look at it. And then once we can see a little bit of what is actually going on with these various pathologies versus the healthy horse control group, then we can start to lay out, because we're going to do a published research paper on whatever we find. And we are going to compare it to that healthy horse data set. And then we also have a data set for some feral horse herds from, I believe, Montana that also sampled. So we're going to be doing a comparison of these domestics, sick horses, healthy horses, and then the feral horses. And I have already seen a lot of feral horse microbiome data, and the microbial community of wild horses doesn't look like domestic horses.
I bet.
So, and it is similar for humans versus like the more indigenous tribes around the world. There's one tribe in Africa that has been very well studied that has like over 700 strains of microbes in their GI system versus ours, which is like horrendously low compared to that. It's like under 100 different species or something. So that's sort of why at this point, I've seen about 75, 80 of these tests out of the 200 because I work with a lot of these people. A lot of them are my clients. So
Right.
it's been a great opportunity to look at all of their individual tests and see the biggest trend that is disturbing to me is the range of diversity in the microbiome. So we know in layman's terms, like every biologist will tell you from the ocean to the forest that the most stable ecosystems are the most diverse ecosystems. And that's why there's so much focus on saving the ocean and saving the
Yeah.
trees and saving all these natural places, because the amount of diversity of life within those systems is what makes that system so stable. So the more we start to break that apart, kill species off, we know just from that Yellowstone wolf project, we remove the wolves, look what happens to the landscape, everything. And then when we change it back and we put them back in, the whole entire landscape changes, even the rivers and everything just goes totally different. So we have this information so far. The highest diversity I saw in the horses that I looked at was 67 strains, and the lowest I saw was 16.
Wow. And what would it be in the feral population, relatively speaking?
It's probably anywhere between 50 to 80. So it's really, really quite diverse. I'm sure that there's probably also because it's all done by DNA sequencing,
Mm.
there are a lot of bacterial strains that we can't actually DNA sequence because we don't have the ability to do that. So some of the strains are just listed as unknown because we don't know anything about them, but we find this DNA in there and we don't know what to do with it. But we
Okay.
can still say there's this many species, different strains living in there. And the only way that horses can do that, and people and everybody, is by going out into an ecosystem. So being exposed to soil, being exposed to air and water that has healthy microbes in it.
Mm.
We do that through our food. We do that through breathing. We do that through gardening, and horses do it through grazing and foraging. And so when just don't feed them anything that's alive and they don't have access to anything that is alive, they can't integrate. And then we feed them things that actually promote pathogenic bacteria and pathogenic environments within their GI system, so that the bacteria that we want to live in there can't live in there because of the ecosystem in
Mm.
system, right?
That's so interesting. So, what are some of the pathogenic things that we are feeding them that are making the environment inhospitable to healthier microbes that we want to see?
So on the test, there's about 10 different pathogenic strains of bacteria that we check for. So pathogens are the ones that can basically hurt your horse or hurt you. So we've heard of Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria. We have Staphylococcus. We have all of these strains that we know can cause infections, and then we usually give antibiotics for that. What we are seeing in horses, there is a specific Streptococcus strain that is highly antibiotic resistant called Streptococcus equi, which is, I saw it in a lot of the horses that we tested, just
Mm.
sitting indoor, like it's just living in the hindgut of the horse. But that's the same strain that gives horses strangles, that makes horses get sick from strangles. So then you can have a better understanding that, these horses can be carriers of all kinds of pathogenic stuff. They can kind of hold it together depending on their diversity, because
Right.
sometimes if they have a lot of diversity, they may just be carriers and they may never get sick. But if they expose themselves and that strain to a young horse, or a horse that's just had a big, huge round of antibiotics, or has just had a colic, or has chronic ulcers or whatever it is,
Right.
senior horses, etc., they can be susceptible to that strain. So that's one of the things that's so funny about strangles is people get really upset about that word, but it is really kind of like kennel cough for dogs where it's very contagious. But
Mhm.
one of the reasons that it looks like it's so contagious is because it's so antibiotic resistant. So it's showing up in a lot of horses without necessarily causing disease.
Right.
So when we see it in really high amounts, so sometimes you may see it in lower levels that are never going to hurt the horse. But the one thing that I did see is some of the horses that have had scopes and have been diagnosed with ulcers have
Mm.
high counts, like actually high counts of Streptococcus, and these strains are opportunistic. So this isn't just
Mm.
that that horse has an infection. You may not even be able to treat that with antibiotics and have success because that horse is compromised. So in my world, what I do is if they're really sick and they need antibiotics, sure. But the long-term goal always has to be to regenerate that system, because if you just give it antibiotics and you do no restorative work, the likelihood that that horse is either going to be more compromised from the antibiotic input, especially if they have gut problems, you're eradicating more and more and more strains. Where is it coming back from if they're living in a stall and they're living on gravel and they're eating cured hay and they're eating ration balancers? They can't restore it. So it's not that antibiotics are bad either. It's that there's no way for them to restore after that happens. So that's sort of where my brain is now going. The other thing that has been really significant in this project is that I had a big aha moment about how the microbiome develops from mother to foal and then as they mature. So if the mother doesn't have much going on, they can't pass it down to their foals. And so we have a really serious generational issue within a lot of these breeds and a lot of these different performance horses and stuff that are just bred in boxes and they're like
Yeah.
for generations and they have no reference to the outside world. And so they're passing down these damaged microbial communities to their foals, which
Oh.
happens with people and everybody, right? But on a genetic level, or microbiome is talking to your DNA all the time. So if, we have all these genetic issues like cancer and whatever, if you are missing puzzle pieces in your genetic coding, your microbiome helps with your genetic coding and how it
Mm.
faces, it's called epigenetics,
Yeah.
where the environment actually turns your genes on and off. And how does it do that? It does that through your microbiome, through your GI system mostly. So if you're cutting out pieces of your DNA, you're going to start having major problems. Well, if you start cutting out genetic
Yeah.
material from your microbiome, it's going to do something similar. How do we restore this system? This is the major question. And I was like, okay, this is like, you zoom in, you zoom out. It doesn't really matter what species you're talking about or natural system you're talking about. It really is all the same problem. So when I realized that, that's when I decided I was going to start this farming project because I was like,
Make
where do we even start with this? This is a big problem.
Yes, I know as you're talking, I'm like, holy moly. Like we know it's a big problem, but
Mhm.
everything that you're touching on, it's like, holy shit. No wonder our horses are struggling so much. And we know as people, I would say the vast majority of people I know have some sort of major GI health issue
Yeah.
or mental health issue or other things that we know now are all tied to the gut microbiome.
Yes.
And I'm constantly trying to improve my gut microbiome because my immune system is just generally trash. So I'm always taking things to try and boost my gut microbiome. But when I look at horses and I see especially the lack of efficacy in ulcer treatment
Oh,
specifically as of late. And I see it so much because, of course, as a saddle fitter, people aren't riding these ulcery horses. They're having major behavioral issues. They're
mhm.
treating them and then it's not helping. The ulcers aren't going away or they're coming back really quickly afterwards. But when you said, well, if the mare doesn't have it to pass down, we're just getting a more and more and more diluted gut microbiome happening in the foals. And of course, then bringing in the limitations around so many breeding programs. They're kind of keeping things enclosed, in theory, keeping things kind of safe, I'm sure. But it
Mhm.
makes so much sense that they're not getting the exposure that they need to other things. And as I say that, I'm curious, we talked a bit about the really dangerous pathogens. Are there other things outside of kind of the microbial pieces that they should be exposed to that they're not getting exposed to as well that could help with immunity?
Yes. So the real challenge for me at this time, and I think for all horse owners, is that we have an issue of real estate is insanely expensive. We don't always have the perfect scenario for management.
No.
And the track system is a really great way to help with that. But most track systems still operate on a dry lot system because a lot of people are doing that because their horses have some sort of metabolic problem or have been laminitic, or we have in our part of the world, it's very wet. So we have to be careful about footing because it gets so muddy and then that causes foot problems. So we have different challenges depending on where we live. And so, really, for me, one of the biggest things that I've found that can help is just to diversify the number of plant materials that are going into the horse. So, we
Mm,
know conventionally that fiber is so important to horses, which is why you have to have a forage based diet and you have to have high fiber hay and low sugar,
mm,
but that's basically like kindergarten of equine nutrition. So, one of the things that I always ask when I'm teaching is, do you know what your horse's gut actually looks like?
mm,
You know what it does, because most people have no idea what it looks like, what it is actually doing in there, and how the forage is moving through those systems, and why fiber is important for horses. Why is that so important? Because they're a hindgut fermenter. And what that means is that they can take cellulose fiber, which is the most rigid, hard to digest fiber. If we were to eat that, it would just come out basically the same. We don't have that fermentation power that horses have. When a horse eats fiber, the more complex that fiber is, the longer it takes to break down, the better it is for the horse, because the microbes take that and they are the ones that break it all down. That's why that giant chamber is there, because
right.
that's where all of that microbial action happens. And all of the constituents that are digested from that and fed to the microbiome through that, the microbiome itself actually creates like basically all of the B vitamins that your horse needs. You don't need to feed B vitamins to your horse. If your horse has B vitamin deficiency, it means their microbiome is totally messed up. And we know that for IBS. If we want to check for IBS, we check folate and we check B12. And if those are low, we know there's something seriously wrong with the gut microbiome in the bowel. So in the hindgut of the horse would be the same. So we have this big emphasis on fiber, but it's not just about quantity. It's actually about diverse types of fiber, because all the different types of microbes that we want for all that diversity, they feed on different types of fiber. So
Mm,
if we only have one hay source, its microbiome gets very fixed to that one hay source. Then you see
interesting.
horses that have like big explosions when you even change their hay by a tiny little, and they
Yeah.
colic or they go into diarrhea. And to me, that is a sign that that system is so unstable and so unhealthy, because they're not resilient enough to take one extra type of fiber. then diversity is probably like if you test that horse, it's going to be low. So this
Hey.
is like the resilience conversation. The more diversity, the more resilient the host is going to be. So this is not my opinion. This is fully science, biology in general, right? So like if we
Yeah.
talk about microbes to elephants, it doesn't matter. We talk about oceans to forests, it doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. We really want to work on restoring that. And one of the ways we can do that as humans with limited resources for our horses is to start learning about plants, different types of plants. What do horses actually eat in that 50 species that I mentioned earlier? How do you create a real actual forage based diet for horses? Not
Yeah.
about just having a couple different hays. It's about trees, shrubs, leaves, roots, soil,
Mm.
all of these pieces, right?
Yeah.
My goal this year is to start teaching people how they can actually go on a little foraging walk and identify plants that they can pick and bring
Yeah.
to their horses. If their horses can't go with them, then you can bring them to your horse, and it's free.
Right.
And you get to
Yeah.
go into nature and you get to have a nature walk and you get to immerse yourself in that system. And so it's a win-win for everybody.
Totally. Yeah. Because I mean, we could all probably use a little less stress, and having a nature walk is so good for our health,
Exactly.
mental
So
and
you just need to
physical.
know how to identify some of these plants. A lot of them are very easy. One of the top ones I always recommend is dandelion because it's just
Okay.
a powerhouse vitamin, mineral. It's a huge part of their diet in the springtime. And they eat the roots and the leaves and the flowers, and they go with the season, like whatever part of the plant is the most active. So, and that's herbalism. It's the same. Herbalists know to harvest the leaves in the spring and the roots
Mm-hmm.
in the fall and the winter because that's where the energy of the plant is. So the horses already know all of this information. That's what they do when they're out. They live seasonally. They forage seasonally. That's their rhythm. So by doing this for them, definitely get to learn a lot about how to take care of yourself too, which is always what I find with horses is they already know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Just to give it back to them.
Yeah. Which I think is hard. As people, we tend to like to control things. And especially with our horses, I feel like that's something I see consistently is just this desire to control so
Yeah.
much about our time with them, their behavior, how everything looks and feels for us, with
Mhm.
little to no consideration for their experience. Again, you mentioned the fact that they are sentient beings. And
Yeah.
it's just so interesting how often I hear people refer to their horses as dumb or stupid or something along those lines. And it's like, oh,
Yes. And it's
we really
very
have no clue.
ingrained. It's very ingrained. And I have to say that I was taught that whole
Yeah.
thought process about having horses, and I used to compete, and my current horse I've had since he was a foal, and
Yeah.
he has thrown every single solitary problem at me that I could possibly think of. He is very intelligent, very sensitive, very talented physically. He's all the things, and
Uh-huh.
he he just wants to be a horse, and he has always demanded it. He doesn't ask you nicely
Yeah.
particular. He's very obvious.
Hmm.
And in some terms, that would make him a problem horse. In some terms, that would make him dangerous. In some terms, that would make him useless. And I've had to go through all these existential meltdowns and
Yeah.
realizations and discoveries and go, like, what is he trying to tell me? Is
Yeah.
he telling me that he needs something, but I'm too stupid to know what it is. So I have been changing his environment, moving to different locations, feeding him all different things. He's been, definitely my number one when it comes to having some of these realizations. Like, I need to follow what he's telling me. I need to figure out what he's saying. And sometimes I have no idea the whole process of having horses. And I think a lot of the, new trajectory for behavior modification and relationships with horses is all based on listening.
Mhm.
They're so good at kind of forcing us to shut
Yeah.
the hell up and so I feel like I'm just starting to understand horses. I think I've been riding since I was 7,
Yeah.
like 30 years, really going through all these different stages with them, and then realizing in hindsight as a child how horrific their lives were
Mhm.
and just how far we've come. It's really quite something. So I'm very hopeful that
Yeah.
it's going the way that we want it to go.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
it's
It's
very complex.
sure is. And it's funny, as you were saying that, I couldn't help but think I so often hear people kind of reference the good old days. So, i.e., like when you and I were growing up and riding, and,
Yeah.
oh, ulcers didn't exist back then. And we just threw any saddle on and away we went. And it was easier for sure. Like we didn't know and we didn't have to acknowledge or try to figure out the issues for them. But I remember in the barns where I grew up riding, people got bucked off every day. That was just a given. Like your horse was going to buck, bolt, rear, stop, spook. And that was just kind of expected.
You
And you
just
were going to end
stay
up on the ground.
on.
And it's funny. So, on that vein, because one thing that I often wonder, obviously, we have more awareness around all these things now. We have more diagnostic capabilities for things like ulcers and whatnot. In your practice, how have you seen the landscape change in the last, say, 5 to 10 years surrounding this sort of thing? And how has horses' health overall changed? Like, is it getting worse as a result of a more diluted gut microbiome being kind of perpetually reintroduced in the way of breeding? Or is it getting better because we're learning more? Like, what do you see?
Well, that's a
A
whole
lot of
I have some sadness around that because I feel like even though we have all these diagnostic tools now, we have more understanding of how ulcers form. We have these big meta-analyses that show that high in cortisol affects ulcers. We have diet, high starch diets, lifestyle, all of these things we know. We know what it is that's doing
yeah.
it. Is stress, mostly stress related stuff, which comes from the environment, mostly human created. But there seems to be a blockage between
Mm.
that information and treatment of these issues. So, in conventional terms, like veterinary terms, we really do not have any good treatments for this problem. And the
Mm.
reason that we don't is because it's not something that we can fix overnight. It's a chronic issue that starts way before their symptoms. Any animal that exists, including humans, have masking abilities. They can mask disease for a very long time until they can't. The other thing is that we have these drugs that are in some ways helpful for very severe situations. But there is, like I said before, if you give antibiotics and you don't do restorative work, you're going to end up in the same place again. And every time you go back to that place, it's going to be more stressful and more stressful. And when you give these drugs, even though they're said to not have that many side effects, I mean, they're fairly benign compared to some types of drugs you could give. However, they do cause the animal to lose its ability to do certain things for themselves. So you can get into a problem where the animal actually requires it almost for life. We're talking about GastroGuard. That is not a reasonable option for most horse owners to spend $2,000 a month on GastroGuard. And the
No.
fact that it's so expensive to me is really kind of unacceptable.
Yeah.
So it's really not fair to horse owners, and it's not fair to horses whose owners can't afford that. And it is not a long-term solution. Your horse will not get better if you just keep giving them GastroGuard. I've seen so many of these cases now And, some of them are so hard to resolve. And it is a multi-dimensional problem. There's
Mhm.
many different reasons why it occurs. I do feel like generationally, this part is causing it to be harder to treat some horses than others. I've even seen young horses that are 2 years old that have bleeding stage 4 pyloric ulcers and can't even swallow their food anymore. And they live in a field and they're with friends and they have all the things. And yet,
Yeah.
they're in this state. And so, why are we
Mhm.
having that level of dysfunction when we're trying to give them the things we're giving them what we think that they need, but we're still seeing that. So, that's when the generational part started to really become more forefront for me, going into okay, so if that's part of the issue, and I've seen also there's a very, very cool study which I have in my foundation course about how feral horse full microbiomes develop versus conventionally kept foals. There is a study
Oh,
that shows
okay.
that it doesn't even look like the same species of animal. Even up to the 6-month mark, those babies that are feral and out with their mums in a herd in the middle of nowhere, those babies are already advanced in their microbiome status. So it really is a management thing. And what do we do as horse owners? What do we do in
Yeah.
our own little worlds where we can make this better for each individual horse and each individual person and not make people feel like you're doing the wrong thing because you don't have 1,000 acres to have your horse on.
Yeah. Yeah,
There,
because it's a very
there's
real
all that
challenge.
guilt that everyone has for when you start to make these realizations, especially in this new alternative space that we're going into with track
Mm.
systems and training and all of these things that you go through a period where you're like, I don't even deserve to have horses and what am I doing with my life? Right. And
Yeah,
you do have
totally.
this huge weight about doing the right thing for them.
Yeah.
And that is part of the process of
Yeah.
shifting into, so what's the first step that I take? I think that nutrition is a wonderful way to start because you don't need to move your horse. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is shift from feeding out of a bag and only out of a bale to starting to think about all these diverse types of fiber. Even it's so simple to just start feeding them dandelion.
Yeah.
Start feeding them some dandelions. Even the fattest horses, ones that have had laminitis, I have minis. You can feed those to anybody and they're going to
Okay.
be beneficial. Basically, it's a very neutral herb. Don't go out and get a big pile of them all at once. So with every new addition, I always recommend to do just a small amount and then work your way up. But if you know anything about the plants that are around you, most of these plants are considered weeds, the ones that
Yeah.
are the most useful to the horses. And they're easy to find. They're usually very well accepted by the horses and they're so thankful for it and they get so
Mm.
excited. Like I have my little basket and I take it on my walk and then I come
I
when they see the basket, they're like,
woohoo!
and they're like, she's taking the basket. She's good.
That
No, it's something you can do to start. And then once you get into that activity,
yeah.
you realize it does hit something ancestral in you,
Mm.
yourself, right? Because we're foragers too. We are
Yeah.
actually, that is what we do originally. Not only are you giving this to your horse, but you're also kind of reconnecting yourself to those places inside you that
Mm.
you just ignore and maybe don't even know those parts of yourself, right? So
Yeah. And I feel
yeah.
like in this day and age, it's certainly not abnormal for the majority of people in modern society to be relatively detached from that. Lots of people that barely go outside or they only go outside to get to and from work or
Yeah.
what have you. It is just something so vital to our health and well being about being outdoors and doing things like foraging or even just gardening. Like the act of touching dirt is so therapeutic for people. And it's
Yes.
interesting. I love that suggestion. And I always like to give our listeners some tips or some things like, okay, dandelion is a great one. Are there any other easy weeds or easy things that they could grab or ways that they could start incorporating these essential fibers or some different elements into their horse's diet that would make it feel really accessible? I feel it's so important. Like you said, it can get really heavy. And full disclosure, like that's why I don't have a horse anymore. I just got to a point where I was like, shit, I can't do this. I can't do it well enough. And
Yeah.
the more I knew, the more I was like, oh my God, I'm failing at every single part of this. And it was just heartbreaking. I really got to a point where I couldn't handle that weight anymore.
Yes.
And just seeing the struggle. I also had a horse that started developing some issues, and I could just tell like she just wasn't well.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, "Well, horses need to work," and it's like, "Well, no, they actually don't. That's not part of the description of a horse.
No.
You're not going to find needs to work in the dictionary if you look up horse. Sorry, but." It's just so hard because you're constantly under so much external pressure, financial pressure as well. So,
Yes.
yeah, I would love if there's some easy and empowering tips and things that you could maybe provide our listeners for what they could start doing maybe right away to help their horses improve that microbiome environment.
Yes. So there's some nice neutral herbs that are usually well accepted by horses that you can just start to play around with. So the first thing that I usually recommend when you're introducing any kind of new herbs or plants or anything is to free feed option. Put it in a feed
Mm.
pan, put it in piles or one at a time or however you want to do it, and just offer it to them and just observe. The way that I've sort of formulated my philosophies around feeding and plant selections for individual horses is
Yeah.
by observing. And a lot of people, there's so much noise. There's so much noise, internet noise, marketing noise, all of this noise. It's very stressful. We're not actually supposed to be inundated like that. And so it is very difficult to make these decisions. So I find the most important thing you can do is to get quiet and to observe because you get a lot of information. And I'm sure that everyone who has horses, like, you can't get loud to get the answers you need from them, right? You need to get quiet and you need to
Mm.
watch and you need to become aware and be able to discern what
Mm.
your horse is saying from a distance, from wherever, from whatever behavior they're doing, from
Yeah.
whatever food they select, whatever information they're giving you. That is the process of having an animal in your life. It's not about verbal anything. You don't talk
Yeah.
to them like that, right? So that's the first thing. And then once you can kind of see what your horse is going for, I generally recommend dandelion because they love it. One of the other ones that's a big winner with a lot of horses is calendula. Most horses love it. It's very neutral, has lots of gut protective qualities, and they tend to like it in dried form. They'll eat it
Okay.
just as is. You can make tea with it. They love the tea. You can do cold teas in the summer, warm teas in the winter. What else do they really love? Peppermint can be a really good one. You can try feeding fresh herbs and you can try feeding dry. They have different tastes, different constituencies.
Mm.
You can see what your horse is really going for. And that information is very, very helpful to understand because as a homeopath, cravings are a big deal. We look at what makes you better, what makes you worse. Do you like
Yeah.
hot? Do you like cold? Do you like pressure? Are you better alone? Are you better with people? What kind of foods do you like? What kind of foods do you crave? What kind of foods do you hate? So we know in every sort of medicine that exists, this is how you assess in a holistic medicine what is essentially needed for each individual person. How do we help them?
Right.
We can do that with animals too, but we have to observe to get that information. We can't just say, "Hey, do you like it when it's cold or do you like it when it's hot?" You have to know these things, right?
Mhm.
So that's one of the things that starts to feed into feeding and even environment changes and all of these things. You start to navigate by observation. And then
Mm.
once you get the lay of the land a little bit, a lot of times my clients will say, I didn't really know my horse very well because I was always focused on like, we're going to do walk, trot, canter today, and we're going to do a perfect circle, and we're going to
Mhm.
we're going to jump this fence, and we're going to like the goals that you have are great. However, not the goals of the horse, right? So
Yeah.
these observations and these little activities that you can do with them, not only do they give you information, but your horse is going to see you differently. They're going to see you differently immediately. They're going to be like, she's bringing me this flowers to eat.
Yeah.
Like, she's just sitting with me, not asking me for anything. It
That's the
totally
coolest thing.
changes the game.
Yeah, and to watch them shift
Yeah.
as soon as you're
They're like, "What are
actually
you gonna do?"
having a conversation with them, instead of just telling them, like, "Do this, do that," and demanding everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, what I found with my horse is I am very selective about what days I choose to do what. So if it's stormy and it's
Yeah.
cold, and he's very sensitive to all these things. So I'm not going to ask him to try a new food on that day. I'm not going to ask him to do any work that day. I'm going to go in and be like, hey, okay, so how you feeling? What are
Yeah.
we doing? And then whatever it is going to be beneficial as long as it's within their range of being able to enjoy
Mm.
the interaction.
Yeah.
So if that means like if he wants to have tea, like if it's cold and windy, that's usually different teas and see what that's like. And he'll pick a tea
Yeah.
that he likes. And I'll brush him and he'll drink tea.
That's so nice. It's like what we would do with a friend,
Yeah.
right?
So,
Very cool.
it really does change. It just changes your relationship and it
Mm.
helps you to feel a bit more confident that it's not as hard as you might think.
Yeah.
I know it can be very scary to move from one way of feeding into another. It's a more dynamic way of feeding. A lot of people are concerned that they're going to have nutritional deficiencies in the diet if they're not adding the ration balancer and all these things. So that's what I do is I teach people how to do the basic part. So
Mm.
my foundation course, that's what you'll learn is what to eliminate and what to add based on their species specific things. And then the new course is a seasonal foraging course. So it's about herbs that are
Mm.
particular to each season and they all have huge nutritional value, huge fiber value, prebiotic value. So it's basically like how you would not sit down at your dinner table with your calculator and be like, hey, now I'm getting this much protein and I'm getting this much
Yeah.
vitamin A and I'm getting it. Like you don't do that when you eat. And you
Yeah.
don't have to do that with your horse either. Horse nutrition is so in the dark ages, even with the courses that you can take as a professional, even the NRC, which is the National Research Council, they're the ones that basically create the nutritional requirements for horses. They're the ones that put together all that information. Even with all of that, this is the book. It's the Bible of what we know so far. And even they have a big thing in the beginning that says there's lots of holes in this
Yeah.
information because we don't actually know it all.
Yeah.
And then the question on top of that is, are they absorbing it in these isolated ways? They're not bioavailable
Right.
necessarily. Are they using it and absorbing it when their guts are so trashed and they can't even digest their food properly? And is there really such a thing as balanced and complete? Like, if you were to
Mm.
say that in human terms, hey, you go to your doctor and they're like, just eat out of this bag and these little pellets, and you're
Has
gonna
everything
get
in
everything you need. Like you would throw the bag at your doctor and we know that's not healthy eating. So when we get into all this math and science and all this stuff about horse nutrition, yes, it's great to know these things, but
Mm.
it's not going to help you if you want to feed like a healthy diet to your horse.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I know we do have to wrap up, Sarah, but I'd be curious, what are maybe some early signs? And really, this question might be a totally moot point because, on the sounds of things, no horses living in captivity have great gut microbiomes, but what are some early warning signs of gut imbalance that people could or should be on the lookout for? Because I often hear people like, "Oh, no, they don't have any signs of ulcers." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, they're
Yeah.
screaming from a mile away that they have ulcers. But,
Yes.
what are some things, maybe lesser known things even, that people could be on the lookout for that might indicate that their horse is struggling with their gut health?
So, one of the big ones that are a big red flag is when your horse gets hives in the spring. If they have like huge uproars of histamine, we have problems
Mhm.
with the gut, problems with the liver for sure. And even if they're young horses, just because they're young, it doesn't mean that literally seen foals and 1 year olds and 2 year olds with huge ulcer issues, discomfort in the body, strange muscling, like body conditioning, where they'll develop muscles certain places and then others they won't. Fluid retention issues, which is a big problem with metabolic horses as well.
Mm,
Metabolic horses
yeah.
generally have problems with their gut health. Pickiness in horses that are very suspicious about trying new things, don't want to eat anything new. They only want to stick with their one thing. There's something going on there for sure because horses are naturally, they like to explore food and plants and the world around them. They're very
Yeah.
tactile. But when the
Course.
throat is cut off, generally there's a reason. Behavioral issues, obviously, that's a whole like black zone. We just don't know very much at all. And also, even if you scope your horse, gastric scoping into the stomach, even if you scope your horse and your horse does not have ulcers, it does not mean that they don't have ulcers in other chambers of their GI tract. So we are
Mm.
now understanding there is a lot more information and diagnosis going on of hindgut ulcers. We can't see a lot of the GI system of horses and we can't
Yeah.
see the largest parts of it. So to say that they're ulcer free when they don't have any in their stomach is inaccurate. It's not usually the case. Bloating, discomfort, lots of gas, frequent colicking, even low grade colicking, standing funny positions. And if they have a really hard time with food changes or environment changes, a lot of times they're having problems with their gut too. So there's lots of little things that can be
Yeah.
noticed before the big scary things happen.
Hey.
Yeah.
Wow. So informative, Sarah. And I really appreciate you coming and sharing this today. I feel like there's still so much more that I want to talk about. But hey, you know what? That just gives us an opportunity to revisit this conversation and dig into other elements of it,
Yeah, I
because
would love
it's
that.
a huge issue. And it's
Yeah.
something that I would say every horse owner I know is dealing with it, struggling with it, stressing about it, spending tons of money on it, and still not getting to the root of the problem. So I feel like this is such a worthwhile thing. And especially now, because there is new scientific data coming out with this study that you're doing, it's a perfect time to be having these conversations. And so thank you so much for coming on and sharing that with us. Now, can you remind everybody what the name of your program is that you just launched, as well as where they can find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah,
About the
so
horse?
I have websites, the animalsynergist.com, and I'm going to leave you with a code for your listeners to access the two courses that are on there. There's one, it's a foundation program. It's called Species Specific Nutrition for Horses. And there's another one called a Seasonal Nutrition for Horses, which is very herb focused and for the season. So you go through spring, summer, fall, and winter, and then you go through all of the energetics of those plants so you can choose them more wisely for your own individual horses,
Cool.
the vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients and constituents they contain. So you can really start to understand what might be appropriate for your horse. And then you get all of the reference materials for that as well. So you get a document you can refer back to and keep, so you can kind of learn over time and you can try stuff. And then, it's not like a big waterfall of knowledge that you don't know what to do with after.
Yeah, which is so helpful, right? Because so much of it is kind of trial and error. And, the reality like you alluded to earlier, most of us have busy lives and we're stressed out. So it's
Yeah,
not about trying to add a ton of more stressful stuff to our plate or our workload. So like how can we just start integrating some of these things and some of this knowledge to help our horses? Because in the long run, it's going to lower everybody's stress, the horses and ours.
exactly. Yeah, and then I do offer like consultation services if you get stuck or you have a really specific issue that you're working on and you're not sure how
Yeah,
to approach that. I have 20 years of clinical training, veterinary mentorship, so I read a lot of diagnostics and I can
okay.
assess them so that we kind of know what might be the best thing to start with first. Sometimes it's environmental, sometimes it's diet, sometimes it's using some holistic tools like homeopathy and or herbs and just trying to establish a better baseline for that horse before we start in the wrong place. Just trying to find what that horse needs at that time. Yeah.
Fabulous. Wonderful, Sarah. Now, are you on social media as well?
Yes. So I have the Animal Synergist is my tag on Instagram. That's my Facebook page as well. And then I just opened the Rewild Farm Canada account. So that's on Instagram. And there's not much going on there yet because it's a baby project. It's in its very infancy. But if you want to follow along with what I'm doing there, it's basically a soil regen project and herb farming project to feed into all of this so I can hopefully get some more movement in the area of how soil health connects with gut health and growing quality herbs for my horses, showing other people how to do that. And then eventually, hopefully, have the amount of space I need to grow it for other people's horses too. So,
Yes, which would be a lot because currently you're out of, West Haven Farm,
yeah, yes,
in
in the
Courtney,
Comox Valley.
BC.
Just
Yeah, which is
moved
a
here.
lovely spot.
I should have done it a long time ago. It's so beautiful here.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful area, and Kyla, who owns the property, is fabulous, and
Uh,
I'm so glad that you guys have teamed up.
yeah,
It's just
she's wonderful.
wonderful.
And if you're into local food and you're on the island, you should definitely come visit our market. We have a farm market, we
Yeah.
have a produce and all kinds of beautiful things that Kyle has created as well, just all farm direct ingredients and it's pretty magical little place we got going on here.
Yes, it really is, I can attest to that.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much for coming on, Sarah, and taking the time out of your day to share your wealth of knowledge with us. And I will look forward to talking to you again about all things gut microbiome related to improve the health and well being of our horses.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was so nice to see you. And yes,
Yeah.
let's do it again sometime.
I would love that. And thank you guys all for watching. As always, stay curious, stay unbridled, and we will see you on the next episode. Bye.